The peace of Christ be with you. Good morning, welcome. It's 9:30, that's kickoff time, so we're going to kick this thing off. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest. And thank you for the conversation we're going to have. The purpose of this town hall meeting is to hear the report from the worship task force. This is the fourth time they will have presented this report to the congregation. Somehow or another, it seems that we've missed the previous three, but I'm grateful you're here today to hear this one. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the presentation. Kim was chair of that task force, and so she's going to share with us the report from the worship task force. Following that, we're going to have a time of conversation. There are cards that have been passed out that you can write a question on. We'll have a time for comments. The way we're going to do that is we're going to ask that you raise your hand or stand where you are. A microphone will be brought to you so that everyone can hear your page or your question. Now, the way to deal with the microphone is to pretend you're on stage as a singer. You put it right here in front of your mouth, just like this, and it will pick you up. Because if you do this, nobody's going to hear what you have to say. So, it will not bite you. It will not shock you. So put it up there. Figured out how to do that? All right. So, and we've got the questions, we got the mic, we got the cards. We just need a presentation, don't we? So let's center ourselves. Let's attune ourselves to the presence of God who is in our midst. We breathe in and we breathe out. For your presence in this place, we give you thanks, merciful God. Fill us and cleanse us. Thank you for these who've come to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for their love for you and for this church. Thank you for their faithfulness to it. We've each come with our own positions and our own thinking. So cleanse us so that we can hear and so that we can be heard. And that out of that hearing and being heard, we can seek your direction. And so we give you thanks for this time together, for your presence in the midst of it. We thank you for the worship task force and the hard work they did. We thank you for the direction that they are nudging us. And we thank you for the future that you have for us. In the name of Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Kim, come lead us.
Good morning. Kim Crawford, I'm happy to be here today to help with this presentation, and I do want to make one quick note. We are going to have a hard stop for the meeting today at 10:20. We need to allow time for the Testament choir to come in and get warmed up for the revive service. Today I'm actually going to be wearing two hats for this meeting. First hat's going to relate to my role as chair of church council. Want to give you an update on a few things, and then also second is obviously the hat I'm going to wear is as my role of being part of the worship task force. So first of all, I know we're not really here to talk about this today, but since we're all together, I do want to give you a brief report on all of the task forces that were formed last year. And we formed 11 task forces last year to look at various ministry areas of our church, and they were made up of dedicated volunteers who spent hours researching and formulating ideas to help shape the future of our church. I'm happy to report that all 11 task forces finished their work last year, and the lay leaders have been busy. Actually, we've already compiled a list of all the recommendations, and we're currently working with staff and the committees to see how those recommendations can get started being implemented in 2019. We did identify two major projects that we think are game changers for our church. and they represent more work than any one committee or council can do, and also they represent work that needs coordination amongst several committees. And one of the projects is to improve the sound system in the sanctuary and add screens in the sanctuary. And the other project is to look at possible modifications that can be made to our front entry off of North Street to make it more open and welcoming for fellowship. And we've actually already gathered volunteers for 2 groups to look at these 2 projects, and hopefully these groups are going to start meeting in the next few weeks. Okay, now let's talk about the Worship Task Force. That's really the reason we're here for this town hall meeting. We formed the Worship Task Force to identify changes that can be made to our current worship services to help stop the decline in worship attendance and to look for ways to have engaging worship services that appeal to current members and new members alike. We intentionally selected people from each of our current worship services to serve on the task force, and then we also wanted Greg Hagen and Sean Hale to be a part of the task force because they play a very important role in our worship services. So the Worship Task Force was made up of myself, Sean and Greg, and also Sarah Graves, Kim Ray, Denise Gage, Ronnie Abrams, Andrew Peel, Judy Oswalt, Tricia Henderson, Jeannie Hester, and Jamie Ratliff. We had our first task force meeting on May 23rd, and we had a total of 14 meetings that all lasted several hours, and I'll tell you, it sure felt like more than 14 meetings. Outside of those meetings, we did a lot of research. We visited other churches. We watched church services online. We took a survey of young adults. We also, as you know, surveyed our own congregation. And we spent many hours thinking about possible changes that could be made to our worship services, and some of our work was actually very difficult. The Worship Task Force concluded its work in early December and made its report to Church Council at the December meeting. The first thing we did, or actually were assigned to do, was to assess where are we now. We currently have 3 traditional worship services in our sanctuary that are very similar, and we have 1 contemporary service here in the Great Hall. We have experienced a constant decline in worship attendance over the past 11 years and have gone from an average attendance in 2007 of 888 to an average attendance in 2018 of 551. This represents a 38% decline in worship attendance, and there's even a greater decline if you go back to more than 20 years ago. One of the other questions we were tasked with answering as part of our written report to Church Council was to identify things that might have contributed to the decline in attendance. And we feel that the things that contributed to the decline in attendance include, among other things, shifting demographics and cultural changes. Modifications have not been made to worship to keep up and appeal to young adults or unchurched people. A lack of technology upgrades, a turnover in ministers, and roadblocks such as lack of money and fear of change. We were also tasked with identifying strengths upon which we can build. And the encouraging thing is we have a lot of good things going on in our church, and we have a lot of strengths. We identified many strengths, including our beautiful facilities, our Methodist theology, our location in a growing downtown area, our wonderful history, and we have great community recognition. We have an excellent music program, which includes the Chancel Choir, the Testament Choir, Center 313, and many talented musicians and vocalists. And we have a strong usher program. We have wonderful special services throughout the year. We have a strong Sunday school program. We have many growing small group communities, and we also have great special needs programs. And I know we have many more strengths, but you can see that we have a lot to build on. In order to guide our recommendations, we decided that we needed to set some goals so we could base our recommendations on the results we hope to achieve. And so we set out 3 goals. The first one is we want to have energetic, dynamic, and well-executed worship services. We want people to come, be focused, feel the love of Christ, and be energized to go out and share the love. Our second goal is that we want to provide a variety of worship services on Sunday mornings and at another time of the week that speak to people in different ways. We realize that people experience God through worship in many different ways and ways that are very personal, and we want to try and meet the needs of all individuals through our worship options. We want our worship services, this is our third goal, we want our worship services to be full of people and inviting. We want to create an atmosphere that's welcoming, and that includes extraordinary hospitality shown by our congregation. Okay, so let's get down to it. Let's talk about some of the recommendations that were made. I do want you to know that not all of these recommendations are final. Some will require more information gathering and discussion. In total, we gave 41 recommendations to Church Council, but obviously we can't go over all of those here today. We did prioritize our recommendations. We identified 6 recommendations that we felt were of the highest priority. We identified 17 recommendations we felt were just high priority, and then we had another, and then the rest were just, we identified as being moderate to low priority. So this morning, we're just gonna go over the top 6 highest priority recommendations that were made. However, we want to be fully transparent, so if anybody wants to see all of the recommendations, I'd be more than happy to share those with you. So our first recommendation was to move the Testament choir to Revive. And this recommendation was actually mentioned several times in the survey of our congregation, and we agreed with this. We feel that a great majority of young people, although not all young people, but a great majority of young people prefer a contemporary worship style of music. We also feel that the later worship time will appeal to more young people and possibly cause fewer conflicts with events that students have on Saturday nights like carousel and other things. A test run was done with Testament singing in Revive on October 7th, and this move was for the most part well received. As you know, effective last Sunday, this recommendation has already been implemented, and we know this will affect attendance at both the 8:15 and the Revive service, so we are currently monitoring this. Our second highest priority recommendation was to reduce the number of worship services offered on Sunday morning so that our services may feel fuller and more welcoming and have more energy. Many of you who completed our worship survey mentioned the need to reduce the number of services offered on Sunday mornings. And we do not feel that having services in our sanctuary that appear to be 2/3 empty is appealing to visitors. In addition, we feel that being surrounded by people brings more energy to a worship experience. And we also realize that combining worship services could save on staff and volunteer resources. In our task force, we had much discussion about whether we could or should actually pick the worship service that we felt should be combined with another service. And in the end, we thought we should make a recommendation. And this recommendation came with much discussion and anxiety. At one point in time, we had 5 or 6 different worship structures on the board, and it was hard to whittle this down to one. If we were starting a brand new church, based on our research, we feel like we would have one contemporary worship service and one traditional worship service in our sanctuary, and that those would wrap around the Sunday school hour. However, just based on our existing worship structure, we felt like that was too much change for our church at this point in time. We also used results from our worship survey, specifically the question asking at what times people were open to attending worship to make a determination. This is one recommendation that's not final, and additional research and discussion will occur before a decision is made as to whether or not this is the best decision for the future of our church. And our recommendation is that we eliminate the 8:15 worship service, and because this is a tough decision, I just want to kind of walk you through that thought process. So here are the overriding factors that went into this decision. The 11 o'clock traditional service is the most well-attended service at our church. Our research showed that 11 o'clock is the most popular time to worship. We felt that the Revive service is growing and will continue to grow, and that this service provides a great opportunity to reach young people and people that are unchurched. We also feel that the Revive service should not be moved to the sanctuary at this time, as the Great Hall provides a relaxed atmosphere and maybe less intimidating to unchurched visitors. The 8:15 and 9:30 services have attendance levels that are not too far off, but the attendance level at 8:15 may come close to that of the 9:30 service after the Testament choir moves to Revive, and this is something that we will be watching closely. In addition, we felt that the 9:30 service has a demographic that is one of our target areas for growth, in that young parents who attend service while their children are in Sunday school. We feel that in today's culture, parents of young families may not want to spend more than 1 hour at church on a Sunday morning, or maybe they can't, and that many of these members would more likely become part of a small group community versus Sunday school class. And our research showed that small group communities that meet during the week are in large replacing the Sunday school hour. And of course, that won't be the case here at our church anytime soon, but it does seem to be the wave of the future. The overriding issue here isn't the elimination of the 8:15 service. The issue is that we need to make a change for the future of our church, and many of you mentioned this in the worship survey. This decision will take several months, and we need to watch trends in attendance and have more conversations and dialogue before we make a final decision on the worship structure at our church. Okay, our third highest priority recommendation was that we add screens in the sanctuary to allow for the use of digital media. Suggested uses of the screens are for words to hymns and scriptures. We can show videos to show programming going on at the church, and we can enhance the sermon through the use of pictures and videos. And we further recommend that a consultant be hired to help explore screen options that can be hidden to maintain the integrity and beauty of the sanctuary. We can use screens in a lot of ways in our sanctuary, and just know that it can really, really enhance a worship experience. Our fourth highest priority recommendation was to improve the sound system in the sanctuary and Great Hall. We feel that to attract visitors, we need sound systems that operate without a hitch and are not a distraction to the overall worship experience. Our fifth highest priority recommendation was to provide distinctly different worship services on Sunday morning. We suggested three different worship services in total. One, a Wesleyan service with weekly communion and more liturgy. Second, a traditional service with familiar hymns, liturgy, and the choir and organ. And then third, a contemporary service with weekly communion, a praise band, and no liturgy. And we feel it's essential that we have three very distinct options available on Sunday morning. Our sixth highest priority recommendation was to establish a well thought out communications plan involving any major changes made to worship structure. And we can all probably agree that communication is key. And we even suggested enlisting the help of someone with experience in change management to help our church walk through this process. Since I didn't go over all 41 recommendations, I'll give you just a few of the others here briefly. We did recommend that we update our attendance folders to gather information we want to know about visitors and then have an action plan on how to follow up with those visitors. We made a recommendation to improve signage in our building, and this recommendation was actually made by multiple task forces that were at work last year. We made a recommendation to have recordings of our services available on our website, and after talking to Bill this morning, I think that's already happening. We made a recommendation to consider having an evening service with a meal before or after. Another recommendation was to reinstate our Hispanic worship service whenever resources allow. So that's just a taste of the other recommendations that were made. Okay, so now what? What happens next? Well, the recommendation number one regarding moving the Testament choir to Revive has already been implemented, and we're going to be watching to see what the effects are of that. Recommendations 2 through 5 are currently being looked at, and recommendation number 6 regarding the communications plan will be looked at soon. All of the recommendations from the Worship Task Force have been merged with recommendations from all of the task forces, and like I said earlier, we are going to start working to see how we can implement those in 2019. And in addition, as I mentioned earlier, we already have a group that's going to start working to look at the sound system in our sanctuary and then also adding screens to our sanctuary. And I would also like to mention that we have applied for a technology grant that might help fund some of this, and we hope to hear about that in the next month. I think although the Worship Task Force made many great recommendations, probably the one that's causing people the most anxiety is the one about combining worship services on Sunday morning. So at this point, as I said earlier, we're in an information gathering stage. We just made a major change by moving Testament to Revive, and we need to see how that affects our attendance levels. And we're also waiting to see how the Way Forward vote unfolds here in less than a month and how that impacts our church, if at all. And once we get to the point of making a decision, the worship leaders, which include clergy and staff, will make a recommendation to church council as to what the worship structure should be on Sunday morning, and that decision will rest with church council. And I do hope that decision is made by the early summer. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. What questions, any of the task forces or the worship task force?
Okay, so what kind of questions have you written questions down, or do you want to verbally make a stand have a question. If you do, raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. Here's a question back here. Let's pass the questions in.
And while you're working on those questions, let's give Kim a hand.
Thank you.
With regard to the screens, the statement is, I sing alto and I prefer songbooks. If and when we put screens in the sanctuary, we will not take out the hymnals.
We have a question over here. Oh, we don't have a question over here.
Oh.
That was someone talking with their hands.
Side comment, okay. Okay, you didn't come here. Oh, okay, we got a question over here, we got a question over here. All right.
Question about the 8:15 service. Do you feel like you have people identified within those services who may be impacted participating in the process as you go through this evaluation period? Is that something you guys are considering at all?
I think that is something we're considering. We've already gotten some feedback as the word got out that recommendation was made at church council. And again, it's not a final decision, but we've gotten some feedback. And a couple of things were mentioned that we need to probably take a harder look at as far as elderly people that attend that service and then go to Sunday school. And maybe they can't attend that 11 o'clock service as they need to get back to their retirement community for lunch. So, we need to definitely have more conversations with the people that are going to be affected by that change and get their input and see if there's solutions that can be formed to help with that. So, yeah, we need to have some more conversations with the impacted people.
There's a question over here somewhere.
Cleet, did you have a question?
I'll make one up.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand. You're just waving at me. You're so friendly.
Just
Hi,
scratching
Cleet.
my
Everybody
head.
wave at Cleet.
I don't have a question. I think
Oh,
you did a
okay.
great job, but I do have a concern. I think so many people use screens to practice death by PowerPoint. I just hope that there'll be some education of everybody who's going to be using those screens to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, one thing that's a good point. We don't want to go through the process of adding screens to our sanctuary if they aren't used well. That would not go over well. So part of our recommendation is that make sure we have staff on hand, and we've got Bill here now, and also ministers that want to use the screens. And if they're going to use it in their sermon, they need to they need to be open-minded to using them. If you've never seen how screens can be used in worship, I would encourage you to watch a worship service online, and one that comes to mind is, of course, Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, Missouri. How that it can be very powerful and really enhance the worship experience. So if you're hesitant as to how that might be used in worship, I would encourage you to seek that out online and watch. And some people that after we've had this discussion have visited churches where they were screens, and maybe before they thought they weren't going to work in our sanctuary, but now they've come around and said, that really could work. So I encourage you to take a look at that.
How many of you love the stained glass windows in the sanctuary? Do you realize that stained glass windows were the original screens? They were put in to enhance worship, to teach. That's what screens are. They just happen to be electronic and flexible. Okay, question. Oh, go ahead.
This is sort of a question and a comment. I'm a loyal attendee at 8:15. It seems to me that while a decision hasn't been made, you're definitely pushing it in the direction that you want it to go. The recommendation 1 and 5 feed off each other. And I'm a little surprised that it seems to me that this also pushes towards something I had not thought about, but it was a concern of mine about doing away with the 8:15, is that there seems to be a push away from Sunday school. Because you're saying you prefer that the trend is towards small groups that meet during the week and not towards Sunday school. So those of us who are dedicated to both those traditional forms of worship and fellowship are being pushed in a direction we don't want to go.
Okay, so there's several things to
The challenge.
address in there. Can I just say one thing real quick? The move to our small group community, that is going to be handled differently in our church. We have such a strong Sunday school base and well-attended Sunday school classes, and we do want to protect that. But just younger people, that seems to be the trend. And of course, we do want to take care of our current members and reach other younger people. So that's why we felt like the 9:30 service should be the one that stays. And I know it's, change is going to be hard. It's going to be hard if we make some of these changes for people to change their schedule, change when they come to Sunday school, change when they come to worship. But change needs to happen. We've got to do something to stop the decline in our worship attendance.
The challenge we face is how do you do both and? It's not an either or. We're accustomed to thinking in either or terms. How do we honor our great heritage with traditional worship in our strong Sunday schools, while at the same time doing something new that reaches a different generation and a different audience? Obviously, our strong Sunday schools and our sanctuary services meet our needs. That's why we're here. That's why we're speaking to protect them. The problem is that way that works for us is no longer effective and reaching a different demographic. So the question becomes, how do we do both rather than choose an either or? And it is not our intent to do away with Sunday schools. It is not our intent to go totally this direction. It's our intent to do both and.
Thanks.
Questions?
You got a question?
So, a verbal question, Steve.
Kim, thank you and the committee for your service. 14 meetings, oh my gosh. Yeah, really. My question is on the 8:15 service, what data points are you looking for to pull the trigger to say, all right, we're going to keep the 8:15 service, or we're going to do away with the 8:15 service? Is it attendance? Is it offering? What are the parameters of making that decision? What information makes it for you?
I think attendance and then just information that we gather from the people that attend that service. I think it would be really smart to meet with the people that still go to that service and see, if it's not working to have 8:15 worship service in the sanctuary, is there another place to have it? Is there something else that can be done at that time? If that's how they really want to start their day, let's, see what can we do to make it work.
There is a principle in church growth that when you reach an 80 to 85% capacity, that people begin to feel uncomfortable and they feel like it's too full. My guess is if you had to sit this close to people every week, you wouldn't feel comfortable. So what happens is that at the 80, 85% full mark, attendance plateaus and people begin to drop out. The same principle is true on the other end. There is a level at which too few is defeating. And I don't know what the percentage is, but we passed it a long time ago. And so what we have to do is to figure out a way forward that honors both. Okay? A couple of questions I have you, instead of 2 sound systems, have you thought of putting Revive in the sanctuary? Let me simply speak to that. Last week when the Testament was here, that meant youth families were here. Most of our children come to the Revive service, which means most of their families come here. So in last week's Revive service, we had 180 or 90 in attendance. And that will be the way forward. There wasn't a lot of gray-headed people in that one.
Can I just add something to that? When we first met, that was one of the recommendations we thought we were going to make, was to move Revive to the sanctuary. As we started talking about just the atmosphere in the sanctuary, it kind of felt like we were trying to fit a square peg in a round hole or something like that. And so we ultimately decided that this is kind of a good, relaxed atmosphere for a contemporary service. And we ultimately took that off the table and decided not to move Revive to the sanctuary at this time.
However, as I look into the crystal ball, my guess is just what I see is that the Revive service will continue to grow and they will reach the 80% mark in this facility. And at that point, they will need to move to the sanctuary. To do so, the sanctuary altar area will need a major renovation. To be honest with you, it needs it now. Look what Sean does with his music. We have to come in and build a platform. There's not room up there to function. When you're doing communion, you have this much space behind the table. And you certainly don't want to walk up and down those steps in front of the communion table. A major renovation is needed. And when this Revive service moves to the sanctuary, hold your breath. It will be the 11 o'clock service, not an early service. Now that's just my little crystal ball, and my guess is I will be long gone before that becomes a reality. But when it does, I want to invite someone in this room today to call me and say, Steve, I owe you a steak dinner because your crystal ball.
I'll just add one thing onto that. The very last recommendation that we made was to modify the front of our sanctuary to allow for more flexibility. And I'm not sure it really should be the lowest priority. However, just the funds that it's going to require to get that done are not anywhere in our near future. But that is one of the recommendations we made. We have a beautiful sanctuary. I think it's underutilized. I think it could be used for a lot more things. But we have a stationary pulpit and lectern and a lot of things that can't be moved. And in the future, we need to look at that so that we can fully utilize our sanctuary.
Last Sunday evening, we had the privilege of hosting the MLK worship service, which involved combined choirs from the area. The choir loft was full. There were chairs set in addition to the choir loft, and then we had people standing on those steps in front to sing. The kind of work that Sean is doing, you're going to have more and more of that kind of thing happening. So, will all the recommendations be posted online? The answer to that is yes. And if you want a physical copy, come by the church office. They're all available.
I had a question. Could you clarify about the recommended evening service? We do feel that younger families might prefer an evening worship option based on the schedules of their kids being in sports and things. And we didn't specifically say what day of the week that should be. We bounced around a bunch of different days. I think it could possibly work best on a Sunday evening or maybe even a Saturday evening. And I think that was one of our recommendations, but we did not nail down what day of the week that should be. I think that's going to require some more research and thought.
What is on the schedule beginning in February is that we will have a Sunday evening once a month Taizé service for those who are more mystical in their nature and want a more contemplative, silent-oriented, reflective worship service once a month. Once a month, Romero will coordinate on a Wednesday night a lay-led service in which the speaker will be a layperson who simply shares their story. So there will be a brief time of worship with lay people telling their stories. Once a month on a Sunday evening, Susan and I will be working with children in a children's worship service to teach them on a children's level what is worship, so that they begin to know what worship is and they can begin to worship without just having to eavesdrop on adult worship. So those three things will be happening this spring. Eventually, we hope to get to a dinner worship service. That is one of the new tactics going forward. The question is, who's going to do it at what time? The most logical time is a Saturday night. It's when most churches are doing it. Sunday evening is an option, except Sundays generally get to be pretty full. The problem when you have a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday evening worship service is that part of your objective, your target audience, are people who work on the weekend and can't come on Sunday morning. And so when you have a evening worship service on the weekend, you're still excluding them. So we have to determine who the target audience is. Who is it we're trying to reach? And what is the best method that will reach them by meeting their needs?
You might explain the Taizé service.
A Taizé service, the word Taizé comes from Taizé, France, where there is a Christian community that has gathered people from all over the world. They have a special kind of music that is very chant-oriented, and the music is sung in a chant. It is those of you who call the celebration service the 7-11 service. Well, a Taizé service is a 7-11 service, 7 words sang 11 times. Well, the Taizé is that as well, but it is much more reflective. It is not that praise exuberant expression. It is a more quiet reflection, such as somebody, what? Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Then you sing it in rounds. Jesus, and it begins to be very harmonious, and it is a way of using music to quieten the heart and to center and to attune ourselves to the presence of God. It is a less doing-oriented kind of worship. Here we go, Billy.
I think the new services you mentioned are really exciting. That sounds like a wonderful thing to try. And the other thing is, would it be a good idea to have the whole church meet and vote on this removal of this 8:15 service?
That is an option. That is an option. To be quite honest with you, I have received probably 100 votes already against it. Because those who attend the 8:15 service, those whose Sunday school classes are involved in 8:15, have been very vocal to me about it. So I don't know how we're going to go forward, but as Kim said, no decision will be made until we determine the impact of the testament coming to this service. And so last week, the 8:15 service had less than 100 in it. Rob, did you get a count this morning? 107, yes! We're moving the right direction. So we're going to look at that impact. We're also going to look at the impact of the general conference that's happening at the end of February. And you need to know that there's a great deal of anxiety in this congregation about that. There are people who are withholding their funds until they see how the vote goes, and who plan on leaving if the vote doesn't go the way they want it to go. If I had 10 people standing up here, I would say to you that if the vote doesn't go their way, 2 of those 10 will be gone. In other words, we'll lose 15 to 20% of our membership. We need to look at the impact before we start making changes. Now, there's enough anxiety going on without us stirring it all up some more. Does that make sense? Hi, Jason.
You got a question right here?
These issues are so important and so difficult, and I just want to say thank you again to Kim and your committee for
Absolutely.
tackling the time, the courage that you've shown in addressing them head on. I've attended the 8:15 for many, many, many years, and I love the traditional worship, but I've felt the emptiness of the sanctuary. So just one thought is to perhaps move the 8:15 to the chapel, where we would continue with those who really need to come to that service for a variety of reasons, but in a smaller environment that would maybe feel more welcoming and more friendly and not so empty and cold.
That's a great suggestion. Our challenge is that the chapel seats 80 to 85. And so that is a limiting factor. But we would indeed do a chapel service. No, but you see, that's a change. And the question is, we're still having an 8:15 worship, but it's not in the sanctuary. And so will we make the change to go to the chapel, or because it's a change from the sanctuary? So here's what I've been told. We'll find another church. We'll just go to Sunday school. We'll stop giving. Those are the votes that have been cast at me so far. And then there's those refreshing votes that says, this is my service, I love it, it's my church, but I'll do whatever is necessary to move into the future. Thank God for that kind of spirit.
I guess I have a couple of comments and questions. So, first comment is we're 9:30 service people, and the comment was made earlier. If you have an empty sanctuary, it's hard to bring new people in. I totally agree. If I was a new person walking off the street and I walked into 9:30, I would think this church is dead. This church is not dead. You look around the room, you look at the people that care, that came out here today, we're alive.
Absolutely.
We just need to figure out how to grow and to pull more people into the flock.
Good work.
So I appreciate everything the committee's done. My question is, have we looked at what the effect is if you take adult Sunday schools to 8:15 to fold the 18:15 service into 9:30? Does that affect, can you keep the youth and the children at 9:30? We don't attend Sunday school. Our kids go to 9:30 Sunday school. We come to the service. And I know there's several other parents that are the same way, but has that been a consideration? And does that help solve the problem?
We would hope that those Sunday school classes, and there are at least 2 that come in mass, maybe 3, that's their primary worship service. And we would hope that that would be a consideration for them, that they would choose to come to Sunday school at 8:15 and then worship at 9:30. However, not all of their class comes at 8:15. Some come at 8:15, go to Sunday school, and then some go to Sunday school and go to 11 o'clock. So either way, we're ripping at the heart of fellowship. So those are kind of things that, yes.
Yeah, and I understand. I think everybody should be, change is hard.
Oh, yeah.
Change is very hard, and that's one of the first things that you brought up when you came on board. It's hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, if we want this church to survive and to grow and to bring people to Christ, we're going to have to change. Yep. It's just, it's going to be uncomfortable, and there's a lot of people that aren't going to like it, but if you're set in your ways too long and you don't change and you don't move, you die.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
We appreciate
Well said.
everything y'all have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the reality is we're not uncomfortable with change as long as it's somebody else's change. Just don't make any changes that impact me and my group.
Steve, a written question. Is it possible to have a traditional service at 9, then Sunday school at 10? Just tying on there.
I think it's possible that I think that might have been one of our structures that we had on the board at one point in time, was just kind of shift everything around. I mean, just move everybody's cheese and get everybody uncomfortable and change hours of everything.
Well, there you go.
And I think
if
talked
one
about
person's
that.
going to be mad, we all
Can
need
we
to be
just,
mad.
if 8:15 is just too early for a lot of people, can we push that back to 9 and then have a different Sunday school start and that? And I think that's something that could still be considered, just shifting all of the start times or some of the start times. I think that is a good point and something that we did talk about.
Yes, those are all possibilities. What I do want you to know is that one of the recommendations was to have a more traditional service, and we have already moved the 9:30 Wesley service to a more traditional service that is liturgy driven. centered on communion. So again, that's a recommendation that has been implemented for those who want the more formal expression of worship.
Hi.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Steve. I just wanted to say that it's when we're talking about Revive, it sounds like there's just a lot of young people in there, and heck, I'm in there.
Now, Cindy.
So there are a lot of people who are older than me. There are a lot of people who are much younger than me. We have children.
Yes.
It's just a real eclectic mix of people, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that, and that it's not just youngsters in there.
Okay, now take it the next step.
I'm sorry?
Invite them to come.
Yes, please come. Just stay today. You're
Just
here
stay today.
already.
Give it a try, right?
Okay, I'm guessing we have time for maybe one more question. Sir.
I just wondered why we have never reached out for a college. We don't seem to have any college kids, and we're right next door. I know that would probably take a person to have that as their job to reach out to college kids, but I think we're missing a huge population, and they would probably need their own service as they do like in Lubbock. I think one of the Baptist churches, they have one service just for college kids, and it's huge. It's very well attended.
Yes. I have a simple solution for ministry to UTA students. That we negotiate with the conference that the director at UTA Wesley is a member of this staff, and we pay for it. And you'll have college kids here. But it's going to cost us to do it. Right now, Romero is working with a college task force, and they're beginning to negotiate how do we reach out. There are a few college kids who are attending this service. But if you want a college worship service, that's what you're going to have to go for.
Well, and we did that was one of the task forces that we had last year, was a college task force, which then morphed into a ministry team here at our church, and we've really started having more dialogue with the director at the Wesley Foundation, we do think that's a huge opportunity for us to minister to those students, but it's going to take us going to them and ministering them. We need people in our church that want to work with young people and that are willing to spend the time and go to them. We can't just expect them to come here and see how wonderful we are, which we are wonderful, but we've got to go to them and start working with them.
Mm-hmm. Another way to reach college kids is that you use them as interns. You actually pay them to come serve. Many of the leading young people at UTA Wesley go to Mansfield first because they're on staff there. They're paid a stipend to go and serve in various areas. It's another way of doing it. We have music scholarships for our choir here, which is why you see UTA students in our choir. Why couldn't we do that with youth, children, whatever area? Well, the answer to that is simple. The 2019 budget has not been subscribed, and so we're having to eliminate probably $100,000 from what we spent last year. And here I am talking about adding people to staff. Folks, we can't nickel and dime our way into growth. You have to invest in priorities. And so part of what I'm working with the staff to do is to look at everything in their area and say, what is our purpose? It's to make disciples. So how does this activity contribute to making disciples? Well, if it doesn't, then you eliminate it, including the cost associated with it. If it does, then you ask the second question, how effective is it in helping us reach our purpose? And if it's not effective, then you eliminate it and find something that does. And the reality is that all of us as church are going to have to learn to do that. Our priority is this, and so our spending has to reflect that priority.
Okay, we're at 10:20, so I think I want to wrap the meeting up. Thank you for being here today. It really shows how dedicated and concerned you are about our church. And we've got a lot of really good things going on in our church.
Absolutely.
A lot of work's being done by a lot of really talented and smart people, and we are going to turn things around. I know it. I want to ask you to do two things. Please be open-minded. We've got to start doing some things differently, and it's going to affect everybody in our church. And then also, secondly, just give us some grace. We've already made mistakes. We're going to make more mistakes. We're trying, and we're trying hard, and know that's how we are as Methodists. And we just, and then also, I'll add a third thing, just pray for our church as we move in to the next few months ahead. And thank you again for being here.
So let's pray together. So if you're a member of that worship task force and you're not afraid of being stoned, would you stand and let us recognize you and express our appreciation to you as well? I don't know about you, but I'm excited. Look at the love for this church that is here, right? And look at the willingness to work together to move into the future that God has for us. And so, merciful God, grant us the wisdom, the discernment to follow your Spirit's lead, and then the courage to live it out. And for that future you have for us, we give you thanks in the name of Christ. And all God's people said, Amen. The peace of Christ be with you. Kim, thank you again.